So here we are, beginning the Beatitudes, beginning the launching of Jesus' public ministry. He's been in the desert. He's been tempted. He was baptized by John. Now he's ready to go. He's gathering disciples around him, and people want to listen to what he has to say. Who is this? And what is he going to teach us? We know he's from God. We don't quite understand who he is, but we know he's somebody we need to listen to. In our hearts, they're drawn to him, just as we're drawn to him. And they want to listen to what he has to say. And so he goes up on a mountain, and in the Bible, when you hear someone going up on a mountain, it tells you that you're going to encounter God. And he sits to teach them. Because in those days, when a rabbi would teach, everybody would sit at their feet and listen to them and be taught and learn how to follow whatever the teaching was. And so Jesus gives us this program for happy life, the Beatitudes, the blessings, what it means to have a life of blessing, what it means to have a life of peace and joy. That's how he launches his public ministry, by showing us what it means to be happy. And yet, as I was going through these Beatitudes and I was meditating on this a bit, my mind kept being pulled back to what I was talking about before we started it from the beginning, of all these sad things that have been happening over the past month here on the South Shore. We had that terrible situation just before Christmas with the fellow who drove the car into the Apple store. And then we see the situation with the family in Cohasset. Terrible. And then we see this situation, obviously this horrible, horrible tragedy in Duxbury, which is impossible for any of us to even wrap our minds around what happened there. And those don't seem like happy things at all. And so we mourn. And that's what I was drawn to in the Beatitudes this morning. That one specific Beatitude. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And I thought to myself, it's so easy in our own lives, right? Our own lives are full of sorrow. We don't need to read the newspaper to learn about sorrow. We've all had loss in our lives at different stages. Maybe when we were younger, we were working, we had a reversal at work where we lost our job or it didn't go well, or we had a problem paying the bills. Maybe we had a son or a daughter who was struggling with addiction, or maybe we were struggling with it ourselves. Maybe we went through divorce, or we had a broken relationship, be it in our own relationship, or what seems sometimes more painful, when our children go through breakups. And of course, we've all experienced the loss of loved ones. Our spouses, our parents, our brothers and sisters, all kinds of losses. So we don't need to look at the newspaper to have anybody teach us about pain and about suffering. We've all experienced more than our fair share. But Jesus says, blessed are you when you mourn, for you will be comforted. And so we ask, how? Where does that comfort come from? And as I was meditating on this gospel, I thought about three things, three ways in which the Lord comforts us. First and foremost, through an encounter with Jesus himself. Because think upon the life of Jesus. Jesus came to dwell among us, to be like us in all ways except sin, we hear in Scripture. And so we know they experienced all the trials and tribulations that we've experienced. You think about his life. We just go through the story of his life on earth. Humiliation, isolation, betrayal, torture, and death. And so when Jesus comes among us and when we encounter him in our times of mourning, when we come to him in our times of pain, He's not some bystander who says, gee, I'm sorry about your troubles. He invites us to enter into a relationship with him where he can give us his comfort and say, I know what you're going through. Let me wrap you in my arms. Let me take your pain upon my shoulders, just as I took the sins and the suffering of the world upon the cross. And let me try to help you start the process of healing. You know, it's not going to happen overnight. We know that. It takes time. But Jesus will walk with us. Jesus will carry us. And Jesus will strengthen us and give us the courage not to move on. We never move on, but we try to move forward in love. The second thing God does for us to comfort us in our times of mourning is he gives us not just himself, but he gives us people. Right? He places all these wonderful people in our lives, our family, our friends, our loved ones, people we encounter that have, at Allerton House, or just kind people who help us out in a moment when we're struggling. And we pick each other up and we carry each other. It's so tempting when we're going through a loss or suffering to turn away from everybody else, to kind of turn inward on ourselves. It's a very primal instinct. It's a self-preservation thing. I'm hurt. I don't want to be hurt any worse. And so we just push the world away and push the world out. I compare it to like my dog, right? He's a wonderful, loving little character. But if he's hurt, what does he do? He goes to a corner, where's the dog? And he's over in the corner, and he's kind of just licking his wounds. And if you try to go over and touch him, he'll just growl at you. You're like, my dog's growling at me. This dog loves me. But it's not that he's growling at you. It's just he's afraid, and he wants to protect himself. And we can do that too. The self-preservation, self-protection is very, very powerful. But it's also self-defeating. Because in those moments when we're struggling, those moments when we're suffering, those moments when we mourn, we need others. We need people to support us. Not with trite phrases and platitudes that everything's going to be okay. We don't want to hear those things. We just want them to sit with us and be with us. It's kind of like Job's friends. They were great for the first week until they opened their mouths. We want people just to listen to us and just to be with us and walk with us and let us work through our pain, work through our suffering, and just know that we're not alone. And the third way that we heal, the third way that we find comfort, is actually somewhat counterintuitive. It's by going forth and helping others. This is kind of a tenet of AA, right? I mean, in AA, what's the last thing in AA is you go out and help others as their struggle with alcohol. That's like the 12th step, I think. But it's true. We find true healing when we look beyond our pain, our suffering, and try to find some way to comfort others. Why? Because when we do that, we're actually coming into closest touch with the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the divine mercy of Jesus, that desire to heal and to help. And all Jesus is always calling us to is to be in communion with him. And to be in communion with Jesus means to live like Jesus lived and love like Jesus loved. And so there's a healing that comes when we find in those moments of suffering at least a little glimpse of turning towards others in love and walking with them in their pain. St. Paul teaches us in 1 Corinthians, he says 2 Corinthians chapter 1, he says, God comforts us in our times of sorrow. Why? So that we can go forward and comfort others with the same comfort we receive from God. He gives us this gift of healing. He gives us this gift of comfort so we can go forward like Jesus and love one another. And nowhere do you see that more beautifully than on the cross, right? When Jesus is there and he's on the cross and he's in extreme agony, and what does he do? He looks down at his mother. And of course his mother's in extreme agony too, because she's looking upon her son crucified. And he says to John, he says, behold your mother. And he says to Mary, behold your son. I'm going to give you this relationship because I want you to be well, mother. I'm going to be leaving you, but I don't want to leave you bereft and alone. So even in his moment of greatest pain, he's reaching out to others, and he calls us to do the same. Now, these are easy words for me to say. They're much harder to live out, right? And everybody's grief is different. Everybody's experience is different. Because we're all uniquely made. But I think the key to all of these is to draw close to Jesus as best we can in the moment we're living in, and just ask him for his healing. Ask him for his comfort. And if we do that, we're going to begin to heal. And we're going to begin to find peace. And maybe we'll begin to truly feel that we are blessed indeed. God bless you all.